Hello my friends, and welcome to another video by Moonlit Sea Prints. My name is David Kutcher. I'm the owner and curator located here in East Hampton, Massachusetts in the western part of the state. Today we're going to talk about a little thing called the Made in Japan seal that is often found on Japanese woodblock prints. Well, one of the ways that we identify the age and edition of shin-hanga prints is by the ever-changing publisher seals that are placed in the margins typically of a piece. Another way is by looking for a more simple seal, made in Japan. Typically found in a variety of formats stamped on the back of the print. This simple seal can provide us with some very interesting information, especially in situations where the publisher seal has not been changed. Just to show you a quick example on this lovely piece with a Watanabe D seal. In very small letters down here, very faintly you'll see Made in Japan. The history of the Made in Japan seal comes from the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in the United States, enacted in 1930, and stands as one of the most infamous pieces of trade legislation in American history. Named after its sponsor, Senator Reed Smoot and Representative Willis C. Hawley, the act aimed to protect domestic industries in the United States by imposing extremely high tariffs on imported goods. However, instead of achieving its intended goal, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act exacerbated the Great Depression of the time by triggering a wave of retaliatory measures from other nations. In response to the heightened tariffs, many countries raised their own trade barriers, leading to a sharp decline in international trade and worsening economic conditions globally. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act is often criticized for its role in deepening the economic crisis during a time when cooperation and open trade were crucial for recovery. One noteworthy aspect of the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act was its requirement for products to state their country of origin. This provision aimed to provide consumers with information about where products were produced, ostensibly allowing them to make more informed purchasing decisions. The intent was to encourage consumers to choose domestically produced goods over imported ones, thereby supporting American industries. However, this provision did little to alleviate the economic challenges and proved to be a relatively minor aspect of the overall legislation. As a result of this act, Japanese prints made for export, which was most shin-hanga prints, carried a variety of Made in Japan stamps on the verso. Sometimes we'll also see Made in Occupied Japan. Japan began using the Made in Occupied Japan marking on products shortly after the end of World War II during the Allied occupation of Japan. The Allied forces, primarily led by the United States, occupied Japan from 1945 to 1952. During this period, which followed Japan's surrender in 1945, the country was under the control of the Allied powers, and various measures were implemented to oversee the rebuilding and restructuring of Japanese society. One specific requirement imposed by the occupying forces was the use of markings like Made in Occupied Japan on products manufactured during the post-war period. This labeling served to indicate the origin of the goods and was part of the efforts to distinguish products made during the occupation from those produced before or after this period. The practice of using Made in Occupied Japan labels was not unique to a particular industry and was applied across various types of products exported from Japan during the occupation years. Once the Allied occupation officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of San Francisco in 1951 and its entry into force in 1952, the use of such labels ceased and Japan regained sovereignty. Additionally, after this point in time, which I don't mention in the article on the website, art was then exempted from having to produce its country of origin. So you wouldn't even need to put a Made in Japan or Made in the United States label on it as a requirement. Now, one of the reasons why I'm bringing this up today is that sometimes this Made in Japan label can give you some insight into information about when the piece was printed when there's no publisher seal. So for example, in this beautiful piece by Haruko-san, we're going to be looking at 3 different Haruko-sans. This has the Watanabe D seal over here in the right margin. Now the D seal was used between 1931 and 1941. And as expected, on the back, let me get this a little closer, we can see the Made in Japan right at the bottom edge. Now we're going to look at another Ohara Kosan. Now this one, also published by Watanabe. If we look closely here in the corner, we have what's called the Watanabe J seal. The J seal was used from 1946 to 1957. Now, there's no Made in Japan seal in this one. So now, if we know that this was published between 1946 and 1957, and there's no Made in Japan seal, we can obviously assume that it is after the period when they were required to use the Made in Occupied Japan. So this is probably the mid to late 50s, as opposed to prior to 1952. Now, I'm going to bring over another piece, the same piece. See, different copy. But this one, if we look closely, does not have a J seal. In fact, it doesn't have any publisher seal on it whatsoever. But on the verso, down here in the bottom right corner, we have Made in Japan. So now we don't have a publisher seal, but we have a Made in Japan. So we can either assume this was a J seal that was not applied, so after the war, but prior to 1952. Actually, nope, can't even be that, can it? Because if it was Made in Japan and not made in Occupied Japan, this would have to be a pre-war printing entirely. Because if it was after the war but before 1952, it would say Made in Occupied Japan. But instead it just says Made in Japan. So we can then assume, not sure if assume is the right word here, but we can take an educated guess that this piece was a pre-war piece without a publisher seal because of that Made in Japan stamp on the back. Pretty interesting, right? Now, one of the only problems with doing it this way is that one of the ways you can see that this piece actually up here has a little bit of toning in it, or matte burn. I'm not sure which it is at the moment. But one of the ways that we treat these pieces, shin-hanga pieces, to clean them up is by putting them in a distilled water bath. Distilled water bath oftentimes takes off surface grime, takes off anything that you have on the back. You know, there might be tape up here. The problem is that this Made in Japan stamp on the back is water soluble. So the moment we get it wet, it's going to disappear. So this evidence that we have this Made in Japan stamp, the moment we try to get this print cleaned up, is going to be erased. At which point, the person who buys this piece would only be able to assume that it was published. There's no publisher seal. There's no Made in Japan. We have no idea when this piece was published. So that's one of those things that you want to look for and don't always want to lose when you take a piece to a restorer. But like I said, it helps with the dating or possible dating of a piece when you don't have other identifying information on it. These are the mysteries that we deal with sometimes in the art industry, and especially in Japanese woodblock print industry, is trying to understand this dating. Is this a first edition pre-war version of this print? Well, based on the Made in Japan stamp, it's quite possible. Thanks for listening and thanks for watching, and tune in again for the next video. Come visit our website at www.moonlitseaprints.com.